Alrighty, so we're starting off in this first room here. That last room we would have been exiting from a cinematic, explaining to the player the initial portions of the story. And so the purpose of this room is to teach the player the first environmental mechanic, that is the chain swing. So these chains are going to be located in such a way that the player will be able to traverse the space. The space is large enough where the player can kind of play around with these and have fun with them, just try to get the feel for them. The space here has some rotating cylinders. The concept here is that the player is being introduced to the spores, as well as these rotating cylinders, which later on in the game gain a little bit more speed and complexity. And so with this room here, we've got the idea that there is a round receptacle right over here. And so the player has to go find a ball, which we can see up there in the top corner. And Spark just has to be able to push this ball from where it's currently located to that receptacle. Right now we don't have the animation in yet. We do have plans for there to be an animation that looks like Spark is actually pushing this ball, just so that it doesn't necessarily look like kind of how he's just walking into it right now. The other animation will help pull the feel of the game together a little bit. Alright, so we've got the ball in the receptacle, the drawbridge comes down. Now Spark is able to make his way back up to the top, so he can use that drawbridge to get to the next room. Alright, so in this next room, we're going to be teaching the player about these launchers. So the way that they're placed now, these first two can be used fairly safely, so the player can hop on them, see what they do, see how far they actually launch the player. And then the player will notice the switch, at which they'll hit the button and kind of be able to see that now they know that they have control over the rotation of these launchers. So once they have it lined up properly, they can use either this launcher or the one that was to the left to be able to get Spark across. So in this room, we're teaching the player about the high voltage cables. So as Spark comes up here, he's going to notice the platforms. Maybe the player would think they're buttons, they're not quite sure yet. But then they're going to notice these cables, they're going to notice these outlets, and chances are they'll plug one in to see, what's going to happen. Alright, so we're going to grab this end, plug it in here. We're going to grab the second end, plug it in over here. Alright, and then we're going to notice these first three steps going up. But not the other three steps. So the player is going to have to navigate to the other cable to plug it in. And by plugging it in, giving power to these platforms, so these can start to rise. We complete the platform staircase over here, and Spark will be able to traverse to the next room. Alright, so skipping ahead over here, we've got this launcher over here that Spark is going to use to get to the center launcher. From here, Spark is going to be launched up onto the top there, where there is a switch waiting for him. And so as we turn around here, Spark will hit the button and notice there are three rotating launchers. And so there's a couple of different ways that this room can be navigated, so the player has to select one of the few ways to stop the rotators. So right now the goal is to be able to vine swing across so that we can get to any of those three launchers that were just rotated. Alright, so here we've experienced our first death. The player interacted with the spores killed the player. Usually the player would be respawning over at the front door where this room started, but for the sake of time in the video, we've just cut it to where the player was before they fell to their death. So you can see with the long chain, Spark has a pretty wide range of movement, so any of these little areas and these platforms Spark would be able to reach. Because of the way that I rotated these launchers, I decided to go to this one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hop on here, which is going to land us on this platform here. to which we're going to grab the chain, get onto the other platform, and now we can notice that last trigger plate. And so that trigger plate is going to trigger the gate that we saw when we first walked in. So we're going to jump here. Now right now we don't have any sound effects for the gate, but in the near future we're going to incorporate some sound effects to let the player know that they've opened up the gate. Alright, so here Spark sees this first chain, going to climb up to see what we can find. We're going to see some high voltage outlets, but no cable this time. So now we're going to be on a little bit of a search for a cable. Alright, so we see this other chain here, some rusty platforms. Probably going to tell the player that, you know, there's something important up there. So the player is going to make their way up. And you'll notice as I'm turning around that these platforms are indeed breaking. So we've encountered these platforms earlier in the level, but they weren't breaking. And so the idea is that the player is learning about the platforms before they learn that they break, so that they can gain that little bit of trust and understanding before they start to break. So we're going to plug in these high voltage cables here, and once we plug in the second end, these platforms are going to rise. And then from these rising platforms, Spark will be able to make it to the exit. Alright, so in this room there are 6 different platforms, each that start at varying heights. And so the purpose of this room, Spark has to determine which of these outlets when turned on are going to give the correct combination for these platforms to move in such a direction that create a staircase that Spark can climb to get to the exit. For the sake of time in this video, we've put in the correct answer here, but the player will be encouraged to try out all of these different ways. Alrighty, so we got that last one plugged in. We now have a staircase formed, so we're gonna climb up here and go on to the last room of level 1. Alright, so the goal of this room here is the player is going to want to make their way upward so that they can find the exit. So we're going to first climb this chain, make our way around this round staircase here. And when we get to the top, we're going to notice a high voltage cable with some outlets pretty conveniently located nearby. So we're going to plug each of these in. And then we're going to notice the ceiling actually starts coming in. So this is going to be somewhat of a time trial. The player is going to be encouraged to make it to the exit as fast as they can. They've learned that the ceiling is coming down, which means that they also have to go down in order to survive. While they're traversing down, they'll probably notice this trigger plate down at the bottom here. And so whichever way they end up going, whether they take the staircase, whether they make a couple of different jumps, they'll be able to use that trigger plate to open the door so that they can get to the exit in time. And so from there, they transition into level 2. Which is where we're going to be teaching the player about their magnetic abilities. So first they're going to be picking up the magnetic gloves, and so using the guiding light of the laser, we're going to aim at these boxes here and try to push them off onto the trigger plate. So we successfully pushed that one off. We're now able to climb this chain to get to the drawbridge. And for the sake of time, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. And so we've got another rotating cylinder, so trying to bring in some of the mechanics from the first space to kind of keep some familiarity with the player as we're teaching them these new mechanics. Right, so we've got the rotating cylinder, we have the launcher, the turbines, we have the chains, all of these different mechanics that they previously learned, just to keep it a little bit fresh in the player's mind. And as we get to the end of this room here, we'll notice a box. And that ledge over on the left there is too tall for Spark to be able to jump. And so we're going to be able to turn our light back on, use the magnet to push this block over. We're going to be able to hop up and make it to the exit. Alright, so with this room, we're going to be introducing the magnetic pillars. So the idea is that these pillars are going to be used for platforming. So first we're going to have to get this box down so that we can open up that drawbridge, just to shorten the gap that we're going to have to make using these pillars. Alright, so we're going to push that one down there. Got us here. Green light means go, so we're able to keep going. Alright, so now we have to organize these pillars in such a way that we're going to be able to jump across to get to the exit. so now that we've got these 4 pillars lined up near the drawbridge, we're going to use this turbine to get back up. And then here we're going to make our jumps. And once we've made it over, we're going to realize that there's actually 2 trigger plates here. And so we're going to need to go back to find that box that we initially had so that we're able to get it to the exit. So while holding the magnetic pull, it's actually going to attach the box to Spark so that he's able to jump across while still holding the box. Give it a little bit of a nudge here to get it on the plate. Alright, now the drawbridge comes down. Alright, so here we're going to have to turn the light back on, the guiding light, so that we're able to use these magnetic platforms. The player has not been introduced to these yet, but because of the shape language and the color choices for these platforms, the player should understand that these objects are also magnetic. And once they pull the first one out, they'll realize that they're platforms, pull the rest of them out, and understand what their purpose is. So here we're going to get onto this launcher, and this is going to be the first time the player gets to interact with the conveyor belt while standing on it. And so we're going to have these crushers here. The idea is that Spark is going to have to avoid these while the conveyor belt is moving him towards them. Just a little bit of an environmental mechanic here. Alright, so we're going to skip ahead. We've got these rotating cylinders here. And so the idea here is that these are now rotating in different directions, creating a little bit of a difficulty shift than the cylinders that we've used previously. There's also a little bit more spores on these, so Spark has to be just a little bit more careful when traversing the space. Alright, and then once we get onto this last one here, we're going to make our way to the last chain, where we're going to attempt to swing over to the other side. But no matter how far we swing here, it's going to be just too far away, and we're not going to be able to make it, which means we're going to fall down into this deeper part of the factory. We're going to skip ahead over here, and this is where we're going to be learning about the magnetic boots. So as you see on the wall, we've got these magnetic panels, and so Spark is going to jump and hop onto them there, and he's going to be able to walk up the wall just like that. Then we're going to walk over a little bit more, and then we're going to be teaching the player about using these magnetic boots midair. So he's going to jump, we're going to attach midair, and then we're up at the top. Alright, so now that we've taught the player about these magnetic boots, we're going to try to keep them engaged with this new mechanic. So when they come into this room over here, they're going to see these magnetic panels on the wall and the door at the exit, so they're going to be inclined to get on these magnetic walls, walk across and hop down. But then they're going to notice that there's a second trigger plate that they're not going to be able to reach, and so these conveyor belts over here are bringing in boxes, and so the player is going to actually have to take these boxes and bring them over to the trigger plates. And again, while holding the pull button, we're going to attach ourselves to the wall, so we're able to hold these boxes while we're on these magnetic walls. We're going to go ahead and drop the object onto the trigger plate. Spark's going to hop on the second one. We're going to be able to make our way across. Now throughout the gameplay, you're probably seeing the guiding light turned on and off. That's just a button press, so we just turn it off when we don't need it. Creates a convenient way for us to be able to hide it, and another convenient way to turn it on whenever we actually need it. And so we have this high voltage cable, and while we're holding it, we're going to walk on the magnetic wall here. So this way we're able to traverse the top of the room where these panels exist, so we can plug in the high voltage outlet at the top. And then we'll be able to drop down and plug in the second one, which is going to open the gate for us. And by opening that gate, we're able to grab the box that was hidden inside there. So reusing these magnetic walls again. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to get this box on top of the scale over here. And so basically when there is a heavy box on this particular platform, if I'm able to get it up on the platform there, you'll see the other scale that's near the exit door. While this one goes down, the other one is going to go up. So kind of like how scales work. So this goes down, you'll see the other one going up there. And so now we're able to get up to the top there and use the chain to get onto that platform. And then that platform is going to take us to the trigger plate where we're going to be able to unlock the door to then get out. So the door is open, we're going to make our last swing, and then we'll be able to hop to safety. Alrighty, so this next room kind of comes around full circle. So Spark is going to see the exit door, and Spark's going to see these two outlets, but we're not going to have any high voltage cable nearby. So we're going to know that our mission for this room is to go find a high voltage cable. So using these magnetic panels, we're going to get a little bit of a higher view to see if there's anything that we can find. We're going to see these cylinders here, and so we're going to carefully traverse from one to the other. And as we hop off, we see this magnetic cube over here. Not exactly what we're looking for, but we see the high voltage cable there at the bottom. And so in order for us to be able to get this high voltage cable out, we have to lower the drawbridge, which is why we need to get to this box first. So we're going to push the box down, activate the trigger plate, and now that the drawbridge is down, we're going to be able to grab the high voltage cable and jump across to safety. Alright, so this last room here is going to kind of bring everything together that the players learned so far throughout the whole game. So we're going to kind of look, we find the exit door there, we see we've got some trigger plates, we've got some high voltage cables, some outlets. So the player is going to have to look around to see what all these uses are. So we're going to climb up the chain here first to kind of get a higher view of the space. We're going to notice that this conveyor belt is turned off and that there's a big heavy object over there that we're not able to pull. So the first step we're going to want to do is to turn that conveyor belt on. So we're going to use this high voltage cable that we found earlier, plug in the bottom. Next we're going to grab the top. Alright, so now that that's plugged in, right now we don't have a sound effect attached to the conveyor belts, either turning them on or when they're running. That's going to help with the conveyance a little bit to the players, so we do intend on adding that in shortly. So this particular box, or excuse me, this particular sphere is not able to be pushed, right? So we needed to get it to this area. We're using the sphere in this instance to gain some height so that we're able to pull this platform out of the wall. Without the sphere here, the player would not be able to reach that magnetic wall on the side there. Alright, now that we're on the platform, we're going to use our boots to walk on this wall here. We're going to hop to the cylinder here and make our way to the box. Alright, so we're going to use this box here to hit those trigger plates that we saw earlier. The player will think that they'll be able to open the door here. So we're going to go ahead and put the box down on this trigger plate. Alright, and so they're going to hit the second one, make their way to the door, only to realize that it's actually going to push that heavy object down, and they're going to fall down to level 3. Alright, so once the player has entered level 3, they're in the final stage of the game. In this stage of the game, the player is going to be learning their overdrive ability, which is going to have them give them the ability to laser cut objects, as well as use their magnetic push to push stronger objects, like the one that we were not able to push at the end of level 2. So we're going to use the charging station over here to charge up. Then we're going to go ahead and use our laser cut for the first time. So we're going to hit the laser cut button. We're going to see our laser, draw a line, and cut the object. We're going to do this again one more time. So we started at bottom right, cut up to the top left, and there we have our cut. So now we're going to use it to lower this platform. So we're going to make our cut here. The object is going to fall down, and then Spark will be able to use this object to hop up. I'm going to refuel here. Alright, so now that the player's been introduced to the laser cut, we're now going to teach them about the overdrive magnetic push. So right here we see a breakable wall. The player's going to look, use their overdrive, and push the heavy object out of the way. Now if the player were to not have their overdrive turned on, you'll see with these balls here, if they go ahead to push, these objects aren't going to budge. So they need to make sure that they have enough charge so that they're able to use the overdrive like this to be able to move the heavier objects out of their way. And so one more time, the player is going to use the overdrive here, break this wall open, and then they'll be able to make their escape deeper into the factory. Alright, so here we have the Clockwork Area where we have some gears being used as platforms. So this is going to be used by the player to get to a higher elevation, but the rotating nature of these platforms is going to be a little bit more entertaining. And give kind of just a different feel for the platforms. So this giant one in the middle is going to be used twice. We used it right there to be able to get up here, and then we're going to be using it a second time here once it comes back up. We're going to use it to get to the chain, which is going to help us get to these turbines to get us to the exit. Alrighty, so we had the crushers in level 2 that were being used on the conveyor belt, and these are being used kind of a similar way, just scaled up a bunch. So Spark gets hit here, he ends up getting crushed against the wall, and then he's going to have to respawn. So this just gives the player a little bit more of an environmental challenge as they're traversing the depths of the factory. Alright, now that Spark has made it past, it's going to keep going. You're going to see the recharging station here on the side, so we're just going to fuel up here. Alright, so we've got another area that we can laser cut, so we're going to go ahead and draw our line, break open the object. We've got some larger rotating cylinders here, just another way for Spark to traverse the space. And as Spark makes his way across, we're going to notice the chain, a high voltage cable, and some platforms. And so Spark is going to be able to use the high voltage cable while on the chain to be able to plug into these two different outlets. So we're going to plug one into the bottom. We're going to grab the top end, climb the chain, and plug it in right there. And now those platforms are turning on. And so now Spark is going to be able to wait, hop onto one of the platforms, and continue his journey. And so Spark's going to have a decision to make to go up or down. So he's going to end up choosing to go down here, where he's going to find an elevator. And this elevator is going to take him even deeper into the factory, to areas that weren't necessarily meant to be seen. So skipping ahead, we're going to be exiting this conveyor belt here. And we're going to use the chain swing to get across so that we can refuel our overdrive. Going to cut this wall open. And now we have kind of an interesting space. We're using this switch here for the player to be able to control their environment, right? So they're bringing in these magnetic walls. And so the player is given the opportunity to decide pretty much where and when they need these walls to be in and out. So certain areas you can only traverse while the walls are out, others you can only traverse while they're in. So the player is going to have to find the right opportunity to be able to either bring these walls in or push them out. So like here, for instance, the player could use this wall on the left. They could use their magnetic boosts to get over. In this instance, we just use the chain. So giving the player a little bit of creativity in how they get across without making it too open. So we're going to go ahead and cut an itty bitty hole for Spark to get through. And cut another one here. Alright, so now we see another magnetic wall here. Looks like it's in the way of where we need to go, but we can at least use it to get to the switch to the left. So we hop on, we're going to hop off, use the switch, open up the space. Right, so now we see the chains, we see these hanging cylinders. So now Spark has a little bit more of an opportunity to traverse the space. Alright, so once he's swung across here, Spark's going to be able to use the chain. Now you could either use the magnetic cylinder on the side to climb up and hop over. In this instance, we decided to use the chain. Again, just creating some form of flexibility for the player to make their own decisions. Alright, and that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. This has been The Last Spark by Electronic Revolution Studios.